Karundar met me in 1970 at the Portland Temple and decided that he wanted me to become his assistant in working for the book publishing. So in 1971, he brought me to New Dorka, and he personally trained me throughout 71, 72, and 73. And then the unimaginable happened, and Karundar left at the end of 73, which was a shock. And Jayatirtha and I flew immediately to Hawaii to visit with Srila Prabhupada. And at that time, Prabhupada was asking us, how will things go on? And the conclusion was that Karundar's jobs would be split. Jayatirtha would handle the zonal responsibilities, and I would handle the BBT responsibilities. So in 1974, early 74, I made an official BBT visit to our Brooklyn temple where ISKCON Press was located. I'd been to the temple a number of times as a book distributor and as a preacher about book distribution, but not in this capacity as the BBT manager. So I met with Bali Mardan and I met with the press devotees and the artists to discuss production in 1974. What are we going to be producing? I have to know, because now I'm handling the publishing. So we were getting ready to reprint two books, the TLC, Teachings of Lord Chaitanya, and the Krishna book. One of the artists had been working for the better part of almost a year on line drawing sketches that would appear in every chapter of the Teachings of Lord Chaitanya. The other devotees had been regularly painting for the Srimad Bhagavatam. We were up to the third canto already. And they had this idea that in the reprint of the Krishna book, some of the paintings in the original were done in 68, 69, early 1970. The artist's technique had gotten much better. They thought that the paintings today, in 74, look more realistic. So they had proposed to me that they were going to take out some of those paintings and insert some of the newer paintings that they had been doing for the Bhagavatam that also happened to deal with Krishna Lila. Okay, so it was my task to fly back to LA. Prabhupada was getting ready for his 1974 visit, and present all of this to Srila Prabhupada as my first official meeting and act as a BBT manager. So Prabhupada was in his room, and I came up, and we started off by showing him the drawings of the Teachings of Lord Chaitanya. And one by one by one, Prabhupada was commenting and rejecting them for various reasons. Prabhupada liked the original drawings, as simple as they were, that had been done by Govinda Dasi and Gaur Sundar. These drawings, while technically, I think, superior, lacked in so many ways, according to Srila Prabhupada. In one drawing, the Goswamis, Rupa and Sanatan, were absent. In another drawing, one of the Goswamis was sitting on the same level as Lord Chaitanya. On and on, Prabhupada would tear apart these drawings. And as he kept going through them, he was getting angry. Now, I don't know if any devotee had ever seen Srila Prabhupada angry before. I certainly had not. So it was a shock, and it was scary, and I was very frightened. And the conclusion was we weren't going to use any of those drawings. So then I had to now bring out the Krishna book and start to show Prabhupada the paintings that the artists wanted to take out and the press devotees wanted to take out, and the new ones that they wanted to insert. So I introduced the topic, and Prabhupada said, they want to add paintings? I said, no, Srila Prabhupada, they want to replace paintings, not add. In some cases, they are the same scene. They think they painted it better. In other cases, they want to replace, they want to take out paintings that they think were painted too long ago and they're not painted in a serious way, and insert other paintings, not of the same Leela, but just because they're technically better. Prabhupada said, what? You have no authority to do that. You have no authority here. Once a painting has been approved, you can't remove it. If you want to repaint that pastime, and if the new painting is better, shows more detail, shows more lila, more character, that might be considered. But just to take one painting out, to put a different one in, no, you cannot do that. He said, once I have approved something in my books, it is eternal. Once a painting is approved, it is eternal. You have no authority. I said, oh, okay. So I said, do you want me to show you what they're proposing? And very unhappily, he said, okay. So I started to show Srila Prabhupada the paintings, one by one, that they wanted to insert. One of them was a painting of Krishna killing Putana. Now, we had a painting of Krishna killing Putana, so this, I think, would have fit the category of we're taking an old one out and putting in a better one. Prabhupada looked at it. He made a face. This was printed in the second canto. I don't know if they still use it. And Prabhupada said, that is an ugly black mass. That is not superior. Rejected. Okay. And on, I showed Prabhupada a painting of Krishna sitting on the rocks, which I thought was beautiful. Prabhupada thought his hair was too long and wild. Rejected. And besides, you don't want to add, you want to take out a painting that I have already approved for that? No, rejected. And as I kept showing Srila Prabhupada these paintings, the anger that had started with the line drawings for TLC had grown to almost like roaring proportions. At one point, he was pounding his fist on the desk, saying, this is what I'm afraid of, that you will make changes in my books that will ruin them. No, you have to get permission. You cannot do this. So finally, I had one last painting to show Srila Prabhupada. I said, Prabhupada, they want to take out the painting of the Ras Leela and insert this new painting of the Ras Leela that appeared in the third canto. Prabhupada didn't say a word for a moment. From his sitting room, he can look into his bedroom where he sees this beautiful painting of the original Ras Leela that Devahuti did hanging on his wall. So he's looking at that painting. Then he looks back at the print of the painting that we wanted to put in his book. I said, you think this is better? This is a hippie dance. Their heads are not covered. Krishna's hair is wild. The gopis' hair is wild. Hippie seeds. Hippie dance. Rascals. They're all rascals. Prabhupada was so angry. He was banging his fist and yelling at me. At that time, his servant Sudama came running in because he heard the yelling. He couldn't imagine what it was. He opens the door. He sees Prabhupada like Nrsingadev. He couldn't even get down to offer his obeisances. He was so terrified. He stood in the doorway. On one foot, he lifted himself up with his other foot and covered his eyes. He couldn't bear to see the scene. And then Prabhupada said to me, get out. And he threw us both out. It was the first of many lessons that Prabhupada gave me about making changes in his books. In the same year, 1974, the artists in Bali and I had thought for the reprinting of the Isopanishad, we would have a new picture on the cover. Instead of Lord Vishnu, we would have a picture of Krishna on the cover. So, again, I had the good fortune to present that idea to Srila Prabhupada. He rejected it. He was angry. He said, I have specifically chosen Lord Vishnu to be on the cover of the Sri Isopanishad. I want this book to be attractive to people of all philosophical persuasions, even Mayavadis, Vedantists, all different philosophical schools, They have to see Vishnu on the cover of Isopanishad. Krishna, they won't buy it. What is wrong with you? Whose idea is this? Prabhupada was so involved in selecting the artwork, choosing the size, physically the size, the number of pages per book, the design of the book. Prabhupada's genius was that he was taking books of the highest philosophy and making them popular. Philosophy books aren't popular. Philosophy books don't sell anywhere in the world. But Prabhupada's genius was to have these gorgeous art paintings carefully chosen to insert in philosophy books to sell them to the average persons all over the world. This was genius marketing on Srila Prabhupada's part. And he was in charge. He planned this. You could not make a change if he didn't approve it. A few weeks before Srila Prabhupada's visit to Los Angeles in 1976, I had come home, I call it home, I'd come back from India, and I had caught hepatitis and jaundice. I was as yellow as you can imagine, and I was deathly ill. I could not get out of bed. And some of my GBC godbrothers knew this at the time, and Kirtananda had connected me to an Indian doctor who was part of the congregation of New Vrindavan, who had prescribed a specific diet for me that was going to cure me of hepatitis. Srila Prabhupada heard that I was sick, and his secretary at the time was Pusta Krishna Maharaj. So he called and found out that I was on this diet. They wanted to know how I was because Prabhupada was getting ready to come here. And when Srila Prabhupada heard the diet that I was on, he called the doctor a bogus rascal, gave a new diet to Pusta Krishna Maharaj, had him call me immediately, and they put me on the diet, and within a week I was completely cured and ready for Srila Prabhupada's visit, which I thought was just astounding that Prabhupada has perfect knowledge of so many things. So when Prabhupada arrived here and stayed for a while in New Dwarka, one of our leading artists, Jadharani, had also gotten very, very sick. She had gotten so sick that she couldn't even feed herself. We had assigned a devotee to spoon feed her. She couldn't move, she couldn't walk. We didn't know what she had. She was in a wheelchair. Prabhupada heard this and he wanted to see her. Now, she had been seeing a doctor that a number of devotees in 1976 had been going to, a well-known iridologist, a doctor that prescribes by examining your eyes different conditions in your body. And he had given Jadharani all kinds of medications and diet instructions and so on. So Prabhupada asked to see her. So we carried her up the stairs to Prabhupada's quarters in her wheelchair. We carried her up. When we got to the top of the stairs, we helped her crawl out of her wheelchair. And literally, she had to crawl into the door of Prabhupada's sitting room and come all the way up to his desk. Prabhupada was getting massage at the time in the area in his bedroom close to the sitting room. And when Prabhupada saw Jadharani, he told her, "Come here." And we watched her crawl up to Srila Prabhupada. And when she got there, Srila Prabhupada put his hand on her forehead. But it was much more than just a parent touching a child's forehead to see if they have a fever. We were watching how intense this was, that Prabhupada was holding her head as if it was an instrument that was measuring all the disease in her body. And he was so thoughtful and quiet as he was holding her head, as if his hand was a medical instrument. And he was diagnosing her. And after a few moments, Srila Prabhupada looked at her and said, "You will be all right. And this doctor you are seeing, this Dr. Benish down in Laguna Beach, he is a quack." So Jadharani crawled back through the sitting room to her wheelchair. We carried her back into her wheelchair. We carried her down the stairs. And as we were carrying her down the street to her quarters, she was yelling at the top of her lungs, which she didn't have the strength to even whisper before, "Dr. Benish is a quack! Dr. Benish is a quack!" She was announcing it to the world. Within 3 days, Jadharani was completely well. She was walking, talking. She went back to painting. She was eating herself. She had been cured. It was exactly like a miracle health cure, right? Something out of the New Testament. That's exactly what happened. Srila Prabhupada had the ability to cure us on every level imaginable. In January of 1977, I was traveling with Srila Prabhupada as his personal secretary, and we had a lot of opportunities to have intimate conversations, especially when we were traveling by train to the Kumbh Mela and so on. So on one particular conversation, we were talking about the topic of nuclear war. Prabhupada had spoken about this over the last 2 years, predicting that America and Russia would start a nuclear war through their proxy states, India and Pakistan. And this had been a topic of great concern and kata all over ISKCON for some years. So I did ask Srila Prabhupada, was there any chance of this war being averted? And at first he said no. He said, communism is so evil. We must force this war to happen. Communism has to end. In fact, Srila Prabhupada said, just as Krishna appears to protect the devotees and annihilate the demons, so this Hare Krishna movement has arisen to annihilate the 2 great demons of our age, godless communism and godless science. So there must be a war to end it. And then Prabhupada sat back and thought. We were on a train at the time of this conversation. We were sharing a car. And then Prabhupada said, but there is a possibility that this war may be averted. It depends on your book distribution. So I'm a fanatic for book distribution, any kata of any sort from Prabhupada, so I'm now hanging on every word on the edge of my seat. And Prabhupada said, your book distribution is creating a spiritual environment throughout the whole world. And that will awaken spiritual sentiments in everyone's heart. And as that awakens, as you continue this book distribution, that spiritual sentiment may bring down communism from within. And then Prabhupada said, yes, and future historians will note this, how communism failed because of your book distribution. They will note this, future historians, how a revolution, a spiritual revolution throughout human society took place. In 1976, I had been flying with Srila Prabhupada to different cities, and we were sitting in the airport past the security, so it was just myself and Prabhupada's servant and secretary. We were talking about war in the Kali Yuga, and whether or not these happen by chance, like a fire in a forest, or whether or not they're deliberate, caused by a small group that controls governments and oligarchs and so on. And as usual, Prabhupada had amazing, ingenious insights into every topic. So he started off by telling us, yes, take for example your Vietnam War. Your president from Texas, Johnson, a state where they kill cattle, a great meat eater. So whatever he tried to do to end that war, because of his sinful activities, he simply became more and more entangled in the war, and it kept going on and on. And then Prabhupada said, but actually, they wanted that war to go on and on. Because after Johnson, that Nixon, Prabhupada said, they were afraid of the American youth, hippies, drug hippies in revolution against society, blacks in revolution against society. And they thought, let this war go on, and we will draft these hippies, and we will draft these black activists, and let them all be killed off in this war. That's what Prabhupada told us. Srila Prabhupada said, and after communism is defeated, we must attack and defeat godless science, the demons of godless science, Darwin. We must attack. We must defeat. And we were traveling on the train. Prabhupada looked out the window and said, there is so much illiteracy in India right now, and that is Krishna's blessing. I said, why? Prabhupada said, so they don't have to hear the nonsense atheistic philosophies of Darwin. Srila Prabhupada's last instruction to me as a BBT trustee was to publish books that defeat godless science and sell them to the temples at cost. They were going to be exempt from the 50% markup that every other book had. He carved out an exception for the science books. And he ordered me to take money from the BBT as a budget for the science preaching, 10, 20,000 a month, whatever they need. That's how much Srila Prabhupada was determined that through the BBT we were going to defeat godless science. Srila Prabhupada was a genius in everything, in every sphere of life. When Prabhupada created the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust in 1972, his vision was, you print a book, let's say it costs $1. You sell it to the temple for $2. When the $2 come in, $1 goes into the book fund, $1 goes into the temple construction fund, 50-50. That was his vision, that was his plan. So starting in 1973, Srila Prabhupada started giving out loans to temples from the temple fund. And the genius of this is that as the loan payments came back in, that money paid for the entire BBT overhead. The temples were repaying loans with interest. And that money was not part of the formula. In 1973, if a book cost $1, you still sold it for $2. But meanwhile, the loans you had made in 1972 were starting to come back in 1973. That money covered the entire BBT overhead. So that's how we were able to stick to this brilliant formula of 50-50. It was 1976, and Srila Prabhupada was coming to visit New Dwarka for the last time. And every morning we would drive Prabhupada to his morning walk, either at Venice Beach or Santa Monica. This particular morning, Tamal Krishna Maharaj and myself and Prabhupada's servant were driving Srila Prabhupada to his morning walk in Santa Monica. And in the car, it was typical that we would either ask philosophical questions, or we would talk about something in the world news of current events that we found controversial or exciting, and have Prabhupada comment on it. So this particular morning, a news story had broken the day before that was, to us, somewhat astonishing. There was a group of demented artists in New York that had captured headlines all over the world by having a party in which they served and ate the flesh of aborted fetuses. This artist, the leader of this group was Andy Warhol, and he was famous for sensational shock. And so we started to tell Srila Prabhupada this story. And I expected Prabhupada, I thought Prabhupada was going to comment on the demonic nature of the living entity and the horror of slaughtering anyone for food. But instead, as we told Prabhupada this story, he leaned back on the back seat of the car, and he said, yes, they have not yet learned in this Kali Yuga that human flesh is the tastiest of all meats. That will come in the future of Kali Yuga. So Tamal and I were astonished at Prabhupada's response to this story. It was not what we were expecting. And in that instant of realization that, my God, Prabhupada knows everything. He knows what the future of Kali Yuga is. How does he know what meat tastes like? What to speak of which meat is the tastiest? Is human flesh? I mean, our minds were literally, I guess you could say, blown by it. We were just amazed that Prabhupada knows everything. And I blurted out, Srila Prabhupada, you know everything about everything. You see the future, you comment on things that are current, but also talk about the future. And I said, this is what makes your book so unique. Previous great acharyas have written commentaries on Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, but yours are not only perfect for the time that we're living in, but they're perfect for the future, because you have the ability to see the future and you comment on it in your purports. And it's just amazing to me how unique your books are, and special they are. And Srila Prabhupada smiled and said, yes, my books will be the law books for humanity for the next 10,000 years. That is how I think as I write each word. Sometime in 1971, Srila Prabhupada had told Karandar that his vision for New Dwarka went way beyond just the building that we had bought for the world headquarters. He wanted us to buy the residential buildings and start buying up the block. And he told Karandar, you buy the first building, then you go to a bank and borrow. You take out a mortgage on the first building. Use that money to buy the second building. That second building doesn't have a mortgage because you just bought it with the other money. So now you take out a mortgage on the second building and you use that to buy the third building. And in this way, you buy up the block. And Prabhupada told Karandar, this is called frying the fish in its own oil. And that's how we bought all these buildings that make up the New Dwarka community. Between 1972 and 1975, we had bought 6 or 7 buildings. Prabhupada was a genius. Watching the loans that Srila Prabhupada made gives you an idea of how this movement grew in many ways. In 1973, about $250,000 was loaned out to temples. In 1974, it was just under $500,000 that was loaned out to temples. In 1975, it was a little over $1 million that was loaned out to temples. Are you seeing the pattern of book distribution doubling every year? At the end of 1975, we had just finished the Chaitanya Charitamrita 17-book marathon. Now we knew we could do anything. There is no such thing as impossible. So at the end of 1975, we get a letter from Srila Prabhupada that they have finally gotten permission to build the beautiful Bombay Temple, Hotel, Theater, and Cultural Center in Juhu Beach. And Prabhupada wrote in the letter, "We have just signed a contract with a major construction managing company. As a result, I will need you, in addition to the loans you're making and in addition to the books you're printing, to send to Bombay every month $70,000 in order to fulfill this contract and build the Bombay Temple." So in 1976, the loans plus the Bombay money totaled almost $2 million. Again, it doubled. And when the Bombay Temple had its grand opening in 1977, that's 35 years ago, LA became the sister city, the sister temple to Bombay as a result. And thereafter, 1977, that same $70,000 or $80,000 a month that we were sending continued to Vrindavan and mainly to Mayapur. And as long as we could afford it, we kept sending that much money to the India projects from the book distributors. Srila Prabhupada came for a long visit in New Dwarka starting in March of 1973. We had just had the first book distribution Christmas marathon in '72. So this was a very exciting time. And I was a Sankirtan leader at the time, so when Prabhupada was here, every day I would compile a report of all the scores for each book distributor, devotee by devotee, how many books they distributed. And at night I would bring them that report over to Prabhupada's quarters. I'd wait at the bottom of the stairs, and either Brahmananda or Shruti Kirti would come down around 9:30 to collect it from me. And they were going to read it to Prabhupada either that night or the next day during his massage. And I would go back every day at around 11 in the morning to meet them at the stairs and find out what happened. What did Prabhupada say? Because we lived for any instruction, any word, any encouragement. We saw Srila Prabhupada as giving his whole life to writing these books. And we saw ourselves as giving our whole lives to distributing these books. So there was this phenomenal relationship going on with the Sankirtan devotees and Prabhupada at that time. One day Shruti Kirti came down and told me that they had read it to Prabhupada the night before. And as he was lying in his bed, he was rolling from side to side in ecstasy, exhibiting ecstatic symptoms. And he uttered the words, "We will smash all these bogus incarnations." So this was going on for weeks. And finally, on March 20th, 1973, after massage, Prabhupada said, "Give me that report." And he went over to his desk and he hand wrote a note to the Sankirtan devotees and gave it back to them to give to me. "My dear boys and girls, you are all working so hard to broadcast the glories of Lord Krishna's lotus feet. And because of that, you have pleased my Guru Maharaj so much that he will bestow his mercy upon you 1,000 times more than me. And that is my satisfaction. Your ever well wisher, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami." And then he wrote NB, note below, "Everyone must join the Sankirtan party as soon as possible." We have that note in Prabhupada's handwriting.
Je anilo